some of the things that we could take from that announcement by Jens, saying the NATO needs to reset its collective defense, talking about changes needed in the long term.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun here. I mean, this is the same consistent line that we've heard from the NATO Secretary General for days, weeks, if not months, really. The need, a reset of both collective defense and deterrence. And I think the stress in all of these statements is on the defensive aspect of NATO. If there's sort of a motif, a leitmotif that runs through all of these press conferences and interviews that he's given in recent weeks, it is that NATO's top priority is to ensure that, A, it is not dragged into this conflict. And dragged's perhaps the right word to use. Dragged into it even by accident or by design. It does not want to be a party to the conflict. It wants to support Ukraine. It wants to help Ukraine to defend itself. But obviously that cannot entail, for reasons enshrined in the NATO Charter, Ukraine not being a member, that does not entail any form of boots on the ground, NATO boots on the ground, especially U.S. boots on the ground. And it does not entail a no-fly zone. It does not even entail at this point fighter jets being sent in. What we heard are, it's not that NATO is just going to stand there and do nothing. I mean, the priority right now is really for the defense of NATO's eastern flank, because at this point, it's a horrific war in Ukraine. And NATO has its hands tied behind its back because it is unable, according to its charter, really to intervene there. At the same time, it is pulling out all stops to try to bolster its defense to make sure that if the worst scenario comes to be, which would be somehow a war on the territory or a skirmish or a conflict or a conflagration of any kind on NATO territory, that NATO's ready for it. So he said that there's 100,000 U.S. troops in Europe. There are about 100,000 troops really on NATO soil right now on what's called heightened alert. Of those, he said 40,000 are under direct NATO command. Now, presumably, a lot of these troops are now ready to deploy much more rapidly than they would have been in the past. But on all fronts, he said, whether we're talking land, sea, air, cyber, or space, NATO is trying to draw up separate provisions to bolster the defenses in each of those areas, a lot of it including, if it's land, having more pre-positioned equipment in places on the eastern flank where it might be needed most in the case of a conflict in proximity with Ukraine and Russia on NATO soil, or whether it's a matter of air and sea. Submarines, strike groups, carrier warships, carrier ships, and also at the same time anti-air defenses, in other words, missiles that could presumably defend against air attacks. So there's a lot being juggled all at the same time, and it's all happened relatively rapidly, this wake-up call for NATO, and you could see that Jens Stoltenberg is a man under a lot of pressure right now to do a lot of things very quickly amid a growing chorus of people, the so-called Domore chorus. You have it almost in any war, Charles, right? The people inevitably are going to say, you're not doing enough. We need to do more. Even after Zelensky's speech today, I would suspect that a lot more people, especially Americans watching that, the pressure is going to ramp up even more on people like Biden. Do more. Why aren't you doing a no-fly zone? And the problem right now for people like Stoltenberg, people like Biden, is trying to calm what they would see as this chorus of people, do more, go to war, drag NATO in to try to calm them down and try to say, we can't do it and this is the reason. We have to limit ourselves for now, unfortunately, perhaps, to these actions, to these mostly defensive actions.